We'll be talking a little bit about the best types of exercise for type 2 diabetes, which exercises perhaps aren't really helping, do steps really matter, and will weightlifting or resistance exercise really help, and how much exercise do you need for any improvement actually with your blood glucose control, and what exercises might be putting your health at risk. This should be fairly straightforward as we move through this. I think most people realize that being active, moving more is good for our health generally. And the first thing I just want to cover is, why do human beings exercise? Now, this is something that I put to the research papers and the academics online, and I couldn't find a real clear answer. And I think it's probably because it's fairly given that exercise is healthy for us. But I would say that in a less scientific fashion, I'm going to give you my opinion on this, and it was a necessity for survival. We exercise because if you buy into the science of evolution, human beings have evolved to move to gain competitive advantage. Whatever we were before human beings, we were moving all the way through, and all the way through, the reason to move was to be able to do something. So, for example, we were specifically moving to try and either move to a different climate, access food, access shelter, procreate. There's a number of reasons why we would have been moving. Now, fast forward to the modern era, as if we're left with an odd scenario now. Before, we needed to move for survival, yet the brain's mechanism tells us that we need to conserve energy. In terms of which one seems to override the other one, it seems to be the conservation of energy seems to override the want for us to move more. And in a world of convenience, it means that we're less likely to move rather than be moving. And that's because we have our cars, we have our houses with things inside them that we need, and we have communication devices, which means we don't need to get up automatically and move as much. It's a really interesting concept actually, because although we're trying to protect ourselves by moving less, it's not actually good for the body. So while the brain wants to protect us, we're not conditioned to really want to move. So what are the health benefits of moving? Well, it's more than improving blood glucose control. Remember, although diabetes is about your blood glucose, the reason we want to make improvements in diabetes is to prevent the long-term complications of diabetes. But of course, if you have a lower A1C, you might have other impacts in the short term, for example, having more energy. And we do know that exercise often helps people to have more energy too. So when you do exercise, it's about your whole health rather than just looking at your blood glucose. When we think about that, I mean your cardiovascular health, which is thinking about your heart and your vessels, your respiratory health, which is your lungs, your musculoskeletal health, which is thinking about your bones, as well as your muscles. And remember, your bone marrow is where important blood and immune cells are made as well. Also, metabolic health, that's of course diabetes, but related to that, fatty liver disease, blood pressure, cholesterol. We know that exercise has an important role in weight management. It's not specifically as helpful as a nutrition side for helping to lose weight, but certainly in terms of maintaining weight and improving body composition, exercise is vital. And then, of course, brain health. In the short term, improves stress. In the medium term, may help our cognition, may help reduce the incidence of depression, anxiety, improve those symptoms. And then, of course, in the long run, we do know that exercise is really, really important in helping to reduce the chance of cognitive decline and reduce the chance of developing conditions like Alzheimer's, dementia. So, yet, regardless of all of that amazing health that we can get, health benefits that we can get, we still find it so difficult to exercise collectively. United as human beings, we find this difficult. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. If we set up our environment differently, it automatically means that it's going to be harder because our brain tends to override what the body wants to do or what the body would benefit from. Let's go straight to it. Hands down, what is the best exercise that you can do for type 2 diabetes? So the answer is there isn't one exercise that you can do that gives you the best protection. In fact, it's a combination. There's lots of different ways in which we exercise and move our bodies, but let's just think about gym workouts, because there's a really good study published in 2010 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which is also known as JAMA. And this study was a randomized control trial, which is generally seen as a gold standard study to look at when it comes to scientific papers, which means that participants were assigned randomly into different groups and they didn't know which they were going to be assigned to. The 4 groups that they were assigned to in this study was aerobic training, which is thinking more around, and for the aerobic training, they were basically walking at moderate to high intensity levels on a treadmill. at 50 to 80% of their maximum oxygen capability. Resistance training, which involved workouts throughout the week across their upper body, their core, mid-body, and then the lower body as well. A combination of both. And then they had a non-exercise arm. But interestingly, the non-exercise arm were advised to do stretching and relaxation exercises. So actually, when we looked at the data, you can actually see if that had an impact on blood glucose control. So they looked at 262 adults based in Louisiana who all had a HbA1c of 6.5% or higher, which is in European terms 48 millimoles per mole, which is the threshold for being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. They looked primarily at A1C levels, but then they also looked at anthropometrics, and anthropometrics is, broadly speaking, your body composition, including your BMI, waist, and waist circumference as well included. Just so you know a bit more detail about the study, there was a mixture of female and male, 63% female in the study, 37% male. Non-white participants were 47.3%, and I'm really sorry I don't have a clearer breakdown of all the different ethnicities in the study. And the average HbA1c level of people in the study was 7.7%, which is about 59 millimoles per mole. A medium high level type 2 diabetes, I'd probably say that isn't that well controlled. So there's definitely room for getting their blood glucose down. They didn't have changes with their medicines. Importantly, they didn't look at their diets or compare their diets. And like I said, the control group was stretching and relaxation classes. The combination had the biggest drop. It doesn't sound like a lot on average, but there would have been a big range. So the combination had a drop of 0.34% on American units, and then that's equivalent in the European units around 4 millimoles per mole. The impact was higher when the HbA1c was higher. So when people had HbA1cs above 7%, there was an average of 0.5% drop in aerobic exercise and a 0.54% drop in the combined exercise. And so the aerobic exercise had a much bigger impact than just resistance exercise. That's really important to note there. And all participants reduced their waist circumference. Then the average, I don't have it written down in front of me, was roughly around 2.3 centimeters. So a reasonable amount. If we were to look at that combination then, what's the perfect split on that combination? Well, I can't tell you because everyone is going to be different, and there was a range, but they tried to keep people as specific to the protocol that they had, which was trying to split people who was slightly more cardio and slightly less resistance. But essentially, in the study, they found that the average was 61% cardio, which was 110 minutes per week, and that was mostly walking at moderate intensity on a treadmill, and 39% resistance, so about 40% resistance exercise, that's around 70 minutes per week. And in total, that's 180 minutes of exercise. So does that mean 180 minutes is the perfect amount? Unfortunately, we don't know still, but it does show that the guidelines are probably in keeping with being in the right level. So the guidelines are, in the UK anyway, are 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise or 75 minutes of vigorous activity, which is where you're really feeling quite breathless and very sweaty, or a combination of both. And I think those are absolute numbers, but I think it's practically impossible to be able to say I'm going to do 150 minutes of moderate activity or 75 minutes of vigorous activity. And what I'll do is I'll put in the notes somewhere, the papers as well, so you can always look back at that. So what about the resistance? So what type of resistance exercise should you be doing? Well, based on this study, they looked at spreading out that resistance exercise between upper body exercises, leg exercises, and core exercises. And there were a mix of different things. So for example, for upper body, that included shoulder press, lat pull down, bench press, and a seated row. So that's a back row. And the leg exercises, they were leg press, leg extension, and leg flexion. And then the core exercises were abdominal crunches and back extensions. And they had on average 10 to 12 repetitions when they were doing the exercises. Talked about the activity recommendations in terms of recapping those: 150 minutes or 75 minutes of vigorous activity. And this doesn't need to be structured physical activity. This can be any activity. Now, the second thing we come to is walking. Now, walking is the most frequent thing that human beings do, we need to do it still in our very convenient lives to get even from room to room. Most people are walking or have the ability to walk. So for most people, it's a necessity. And it is, when you look at the studies, it's the most frequent activity that people do when they have type 2 diabetes to try and improve their blood glucose levels. So does walking work? So this is a difficult one based on the studies. The answer is yes, it does. But the studies suggest you need to do quite a lot of walking. Quite a lot of walking in our modern lives is about between 120 to 150 minutes per week. And one of the studies looked at the level required to start to make a shift in your A1C was really around 120 minutes per week, which is 2 hours. That sounds like a lot, but when you split it between 6 to 7 days, it's really not that much. If you think about walking 30 minutes a day, if you were forced to do that walk, for example, if you were walking somewhere, that would be a 15-minute walk somewhere and 15 minutes walk back. And you kept on doing that, then your minutes really do add up. But the problem is our environment, our modern lifestyles actually often prevent us from even doing a 15-minute walk. Now, I can tell you on the days that I'm sat in front of my computer working from home, I will do under 500 steps. And my average steps on those days range between 200 to 400 steps. On the days that I leave the house and just go to the gym, which is a 20-minute walk away, I'll get a minimum of 4,500 steps in, and I'll do a 30-minute gym workout. And usually my gym workout will be 20 to 25 minutes resistance and 5 to 10 minutes cardio. And that probably, when you look at the guidelines, when you look at mixing in the walking as a moderate intensity exercise, and then the resistance is probably a good combination. So what about the walking then? So it's a moderate intensity in terms of the walking. So moderate intensity means that you're not walking at a stroll or a casual pace. You're probably walking with a bit of purpose. And so if you can imagine, it's a bit more of a stride. It's not walking, speed walking, and you're not necessarily getting sweaty, but you will be walking at a certain pace. And in terms of the reduction, that was really similar to the combination interventions, different studies. This study is a meta-analysis, so it's arguably even better than the randomized control trial, because the randomized control trial looked at 262 individual participants in that study. Meta-analysis will take a number of studies and usually will have a minimum 1,000, often 10,000 plus participants overall that they're reviewing, and then they're getting data from that. So it's a pretty reliable study, and they found an average reduction of 0.5%. which is very similar to the aerobic only arm in the randomized control trial, which is 0.5% when people had HbA1cs above 7%, and it was 0.54%. We should be thinking about moving more. The problem with the walking studies is that they didn't look at the minimum amount to start to see a shift. And the general feeling is that you need to get 120 minutes. Now, for some of you, you might not be even getting to 30, 40 minutes. Now, you might find that you actually are when you think about the amount of movement that you're doing during a week. You want to be looking incrementally. If I say to someone who's doing 0 minutes of movement and I get them to say, look, you need to be doing 120 minutes a week, and every week they're expecting to do 120 minutes, so they have to find 120 minutes into their schedule that they're not used to finding. That's really, really difficult. And what I would often say with clients is, what are you doing already? And start there, because we can just increase on the things that you enjoy, or start doing things that are easy to do. For most people, the easiest thing to do is to start walking. And sometimes there are barriers to walking. Sometimes it can be really simple things like having the right footwear. Depends what the weather's like. Have you got the right gear to go out for a walk? There are different weather systems going on around the world all the time. So people are going to be exposed to different weather all the time. And that should be a given and something that you automatically get over rather than it being seen as a barrier. The good news is, if I was to summarize all of this, the really good news is that walking itself helps. The drawback is it's not a simple stroll, and it's not 30 minutes once a week. It's regular walking at a moderate pace. And once you start walking regularly, the pace naturally increases. The other good news is it's a combination of resistance and cardio. And the reason why that's good news is because we need both for our longevity. When we think about what causes major problems as we get older, it is cognitive decline. it is musculoskeletal health. So we need to strengthen our muscles, especially our lower leg muscles, because it's those muscles that increase the risk. If we don't have them, it increases the risk of immobility, increases the risk of not being able to care for oneself, increases the risk of hip fractures. Those are all really, really key. And imagine this, when you are exercising your muscles, you are essentially exercising your bones, because strong muscles need strong bones. And then obviously we're thinking about cardiovascular health and respiratory health. These are really important as we get older for fighting infections, staying healthy, staying independent. All of these things together we need to do. So regardless of whether it's for diabetes or whether it's for other parts of your health, the good news is you're going to have benefits across the board. If I can give you one piece of advice, it's get walking, and ideally get walking to a gym or doing some other activities. What we haven't covered today, which is perhaps something that we can talk about, racket sports and other specific sports, especially team sports, and how they can impact on diabetes control. Finally, before I let you go, things that may not be helpful for diabetes. Often people think towards lower intensity activities. So that's things like Tai Chi or yoga at low intensity, because yoga has a varied intensity depending on the type of yoga that you're doing, mindfulness, stretching, and relaxation. Back to that randomized control trial, the control arm showed that there was no change in the A1C percentage of participants who were in the stretching arm. Now, what we don't know is we don't know what they were doing in terms of their nutrition habits. We don't know what was happening in terms of their sleep. And we don't know what was happening in terms of their stress generally. And all of those things are at play as well. So the difficult thing, even though these things are randomized controlled trials, is that there are multiple variables at play. If you find that yoga is helpful for you for certain things, including mindfulness, or you actually find that it is helping you with your exercise routine, then I would recommend that you keep doing it. If you find that you're doing certain things like mindfulness, relaxation, stretching, yoga, Tai Chi, and you're still getting a high blood glucose level, then that's where you might need to think about increasing the intensity of your exercise. Oh, final point on the randomized control trial. They did that intervention over 9 months. So it does require consistency, but it's consistency that will win you the game as you get older and protecting you against those complications that we want to avoid with type 2 diabetes. That includes heart attacks and strokes. And that includes the risk with dementia with type 2 diabetes as well. Keep exercising, keep moving. The biggest tip is find a purpose to move. So if you have to go somewhere, if you have to walk there, that's the way that you'll keep this movement up without even thinking about it.